This evening I had committed to speaking to you. I committed to talking about a merchant from the Middle Ages, trying to understand how a merchant from the Middle Ages thought and how he viewed the world. This merchant is Dino Compagni, a Florentine merchant who lived between the 13th and 14th centuries, roughly contemporary with Dante, and who wrote a small book for us. Those who were there last night remember that Fra Salimbene wrote a chronicle of 900 pages. Dino Compagni wrote a small book, a much more manageable book, in which he wanted to recount certain important things that happened in Florence, when he not only lived there but was also a significant man in Florence, Dino. And in this sense, I told myself that perhaps upon further reflection, instead of telling you how a merchant from the Middle Ages thought and viewed the world, I might have done better to say how a politician from the Middle Ages saw the world. Because in reality, Dino is primarily a man of politics. The Dino depicted in this chronicle is primarily someone who engaged in politics in Florence and who tells us what it meant to do politics in the Florence of the communes, in the Florence of the Guelphs and Ghibellines, of the whites and the blacks. It was no joke to engage in politics in that world, make no mistake. Dino is naturally a merchant. He is an entrepreneur who belongs to the Port Dante Maria Guild, which has this somewhat curious name. It is a Florentine guild that deals with large-scale trade, focusing on the import-export of cloth. Dino has an important business. He is a wealthy man, but he is a man who, for a certain phase of his life, engages in politics. He finds himself in the government of the city. Then things go badly for him. His side is defeated. He is thrown out of politics. He continues to live in Florence, continues to do his job as an entrepreneur. But he has this thing inside him that gnaws at him, that for a while he was in power, he tried, as he says, to prevent things from going as badly as they are going. And now that he sees that things are really going badly, he somewhat regrets the years when he sat in those chairs and had the opportunity to make an impact, in short. And he says, at least I felt the urge to write, to tell, if nothing else, what I have seen. These are not uplifting things at all, he says. I felt the urge to write. For a while I held on because I said to myself, I'm just not capable. He is a merchant. He doesn't know Latin. He is not like Salimbene, whom we met last night, who knows Latin perfectly, thinks in Latin, and is able to write in Latin. No, Dino writes in Italian. He can read and write as well as do arithmetic, because he is a businessman, a man of commerce. He must know how to keep accounts, but he doesn't know Latin or knows very little. He writes in Italian and Tuscan. He says, I thought I wasn't capable. Then above all, he says, I gave up for quite a while, believing that others would write. And this is something that I think is significant. It struck me. You see, we are in a world where there are no newspapers, no television. There is nothing. Great events are happening. Politics has its very violent conflicts. There are great changes in power, in government. These great things are occurring. And in the future, what will they know? And in the future, they will know something if someone writes. Because if there is no one writing, the memory of all this will be lost. And Dino says, believing that others would write for a long time, I gave up. Then he felt like writing himself to express his opinion. And so he expresses his opinion. But indeed, his is the voice of a man who has been in politics, who has been influential, and then at a certain point lost. He was thrown out. And so we obviously have to adjust our judgments of value. But we are not interested here in deciding whether the Guelphs were better or the Ghibellines, whether the whites were better or the blacks. Here the challenge is to try to understand how Dino Compagni, a merchant of the Port Dante Maria Corporation at the time of Dante, saw the world. And so let's start telling how a merchant like Dino Compagni, an entrepreneur, finds himself at a certain point in the government of the city. It's not such an obvious thing because I don't want to keep referring to what I said yesterday. As many people here rightly weren't there yesterday, but yesterday we talked about a Franciscan friar who, however, was from a noble family, belonging to a great family of knights from Parma. Here, in the Italian communes, there was a nobility of great noble families, people who had ancestors, a coat of arms, lands, castles, towers in the city, horses, weapons, the habit of fighting, the habit of participating in tournaments. These gentlemen, as they called them, had for a long time been the ones who commanded in the cities. They commanded, the merchants were in the shops, they were at the warehouse, the artisans were working. In the communes, the nobles commanded, the knights commanded. And the admiration for the nobles, for the knights, for these people who belong to a higher world. Socially speaking, it is still part of Dino Compagni's worldview. Dino Compagni, who is a merchant, is not one of them. And indeed, as we will see, he would have no common interest with them. Rather, with the nobles, when he is in politics, he actually has very harsh confrontations. However, for a man of that era, the gentlemen, the knights are still something. In short, instinctively one takes off their hat in front of the knights. You think that in Florence there are a series of customs. Dino recounts them. Once there was a funeral, a woman from the Frescobaldi was buried. There were a lot of people in the square. And how is it done in Florence? All the citizens sat on the ground on mats. In the Middle Ages, they had few pieces of furniture and sat on the ground with an ease, a nonchalance that we would no longer do today. Dino says, as is customary in Florence at funerals, all the citizens were sitting on the ground on mats, except for the knights and the doctors, who were seated on benches higher up. The doctors are the graduates of the university. Well, I won't dwell on the fact that the prestige of university professors once was, well, greater. In any case, the knights and the doctors, the law graduates, the judges, well, they were on the benches, the others below. And it's not just a matter of honor. The knights are the citizens who matter the most from all points of view. At a certain point in Florence, a number of citizens were exiled for political reasons. Then they regret it. They realize they were wrong. They bring them back and give them compensation, says Dino. But more to the knights and less to the others, because being a knight means being part of, being the elite of society. The knights, you see, are necessary. You send an embassy to the Pope. Who do you send? A shoemaker. The shoemaker can also be in government, as we will see in Florence. But in the embassy to the Pope, you need to include knights, people who are used to being in society, to mingling with the powerful, who are well-mannered. And then the knights are necessary in war, because it is true that when the commune goes to war, it calls everyone to fight. And so all the citizens, the artisans, the merchants, all organized into neighborhood companies, all on foot with their spears, their shields. Yes, but the nobles who know how to ride, who have armor, who spend their lives fighting in tournaments, the noble knights. Without them, an army cannot be formed. They are the ones who win battles, not the mass of plebeians and bourgeois organized in their infantry companies. Therefore, the nobles are fundamental to the life of the commune, and for a long time, they commanded. And the nobles, I realize I need to talk to you about how Dino Compagni viewed the world, and instead, I am talking about the others, those who were different from him, those he looked down upon, and who were above him. A merchant of that time lived in an Italian city, and above him were the lords, there were the nobles. It doesn't matter if the commune is democratic and everyone votes, the nobles count. The nobles share a system of values, the chivalric ideology, where, in short, one must know how to sacrifice oneself, must be willing to be killed in battle if necessary, where honor is at the center of everything. Dino Compagni at a certain point recounts a great battle, indeed it is the starting point of his chronicle, a great battle in which the Florentines defeated Arezzo, 1289, the Battle of Campaldino, where Dante also fought, who was a noble among the knights of Florence. And Dino says that battle was very tough. There were people who were killed rather than retreating, and there were also those who fled, while it was thought they should do who knows what, and instead they ran away. But many fought very well, and Dino says that morning before the battle, they had armed the new knights, meaning a certain number of young nobles had been adorned as knights with the ritual that transforms an ordinary man into a knight, the sword resting on the shoulder. It is obvious that a young man who was made a knight that morning, if there is a battle in the afternoon, would rather be killed than make a bad impression. Therefore, the values of knights are central in this society, and for a long time, merchants like Dino stayed in the shop, in the warehouse, in the business, exchanging money, trading goods, buying fabrics, doing import-export, knowing that their work brought in a lot of money. Yes, but compared to the life of knights who ride around, own land, and do not work, a merchant, in short, is always a bit of a poor man in the perspective of that generation. Thus, for a long time, the noble knights commanded in Florence, as in all Italian cities, and the merchants, like Dino, had to obey, work, make money, and pay taxes. However, the nobles are also cumbersome. A city managed by this type of people is burdensome. These are people who go around armed, who always have their sword at their side at any moment and draw it out if something bothers them. The nobles think only of war. They know how to wage it, know how to fight, and have the unpleasant tendency to draw their sword, even in situations where two merchants might discuss and try to come to an agreement. Not the nobles. The nobles occupy important positions, not only in the municipality and in political life, but also in the church. The bishops are all nobles. Then perhaps they are like that bishop of Arezzo, whom Dino Compagni tells about, Guglielmo degli Uberti, who, according to Dino Compagni, the bishop of Arezzo, knew the offices of war better than those of the church. And indeed, in war, he will be killed at the head of the cavalry of Arezzo at the Battle of Campaldino. These are the nobles. The nobles are organized into families. Dino Compagni, when describing society, first sees at the top what he calls the families. If it evokes a somewhat mafia-like panorama, you are not mistaken, because we are there. The nobles are the families, because the nobles have many relatives, an important surname. Often only the nobles have a surname. Dino Compagni has a surname because he is already a wealthy bourgeois, but most Florentines do not even have a surname. They are called Dino, Di Giovanni, Di Andrea, Di Bartolomeo. Instead, the nobles are the Cavalcanti, the Brunelleschi, the Tosinghi, and so on. The nobles are the families, and each family is numerous. At a certain point, he says, the Cavalcanti had a dispute with different families against the Cavalcanti, and the Cavalcanti were strong. They alone had 60 men capable of bearing arms. You understand that if one has to go to the square, they are engaging in politics. We must go to the square, and they are from our family. We are 60 going to the square on horseback in armor, and well, that weighs heavily. And these families are ready to kill to defend their power, to defend their honor, to defend their interests. These families are power consortia, where it's not that they care for each other, but the interests are what hold everything together. There is an extraordinary passage. He is recounting something that happened in Arezzo. There was indeed that bishop I mentioned earlier, the bishop of Arezzo, who knew more about war than about the church. Dino says that at a certain point, there was a political problem. The bishop betrayed his side, betrayed his family, and tried to come to an agreement with the Florentines while his friends and relatives wanted to go to war against Florence. Then Dino says, in Arezzo they have somewhat dried up. Because the bishop was negotiating with the enemy. And so, Dino says, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, they decided to have him killed. So the government of Arezzo gathered and said, this bishop is bothering us, so let's have him killed. In the council of Arezzo, there is also a relative of the bishop, Messer Guglielmo de' Pazzi. Messer Guglielmo de' Pazzi, his consort, meaning a member of the same family consortium as the bishop, when he hears about the discussion of having the bishop killed, Messer Guglielmo de' Pazzi, who was in the council, said he would have been very happy if they had done it, not having known. But if asked, he would not consent. In other words, if you did it without telling me, that would be just fine, because I also agree that this bishop is really annoying, you see. But he is a relative of mine, so you cannot ask me to vote to have him killed in the city council. I'm sorry, but I cannot vote to have him killed. There, this is the way. This is the way nobles do politics. Nobles do politics and always have the sword at their side and are ready to draw it. And people like Dino do not have the sword at their side. Merchants work, make money, do not have the sword, do not ride horses, and do not have as many relatives as the nobles do. Dino Compagni never mentions a relative in the entire chronicle. For nobles, family is everything. Relatives come up continuously. Everything revolves around kinship. Dino has no relatives. He is a man who made himself. He is truly a self-made man, like many of these common people of Florence. The nobles have managed Florence for a long time, but they have not managed it peacefully because they slaughter each other. They slaughter each other for interest, creating groupings of families. At a certain point, the Guelphs and the Bellinis were born. As you all know, those who would like the world to be ruled by the Pope, and those who would like the world to be ruled by the Emperor. But in reality, how does one become a Guelph? Because the rival noble family is with the Ghibellines, and they did us a disservice many years ago. What disservice? We don't really remember anymore, but it is known that with them we are enemies, and if they are Ghibellines, we are Guelphs. Adino, my friends, none of this matters. He is a businessman who thinks about making money and importing cloth from France. But he knows that in his city, these factions of great noble families have dominated for a long time. The cursed factions. Because it is precisely this division of the city into parties that, for people like Dino, is the starting point of all evils. If we were all united, we would talk about it again. Instead, we are not all united. These clienteles that build around the great families are strong, they are rooted, they are not just the nobles, they have their followers. A great noble family owns many houses in the city, rents them out, owns shops, and rents them out. If you are a tenant of the Uberti, you are with them. If you are, how should I put it, an entrepreneur who works for the Uberti, you are with them anyway. The Uberti, are the great Ghibelline family that at a certain point is expelled from Florence when the Guelphs win, and they will never return. Everyone remembers Maria degli Uberti in Dante's Inferno. Well, Dino recounts that at a certain point there is a truce. There is a moment of truce in which something is done that has never been seen before. They come to an agreement and allow the exiled Ghibellines to return to Florence. It will last very little. After a few months, they argue and throw them out again. But at that moment, when the exiled Ghibellines returned to Florence, and for the first time the Uberti returned to Florence, and the Uberti were seen entering Florence on horseback with their shields, with their coat of arms, Dino says there were many people, old Ghibellines, men and women, who ran to kiss the coat of arms of the Uberti after 50 years that the Uberti had been exiled from the city. So these factions are rooted. They are deeply rooted. This is a very factional world where, unlike our political factionalism today, they have a greater outlet. When you just can't take it anymore, you kill the others. In the face of this situation, people like Dino at a certain point can't take it anymore. People like Dino who would like to work, make money in a peaceful city, at a certain point decide that the nobles are the curse of this city. If there were no nobles, it would be so good. Everyone working, no Guelfi, no Ghibellines. And then what they call the government of the people is born. People is a big word. People would mean everyone except the nobles. In reality, in Florence, people means, the good people who pay taxes. So first of all, the entrepreneurs, those who have shops, who have a business, that is the people. In Florence, at a certain point, they create a government of the people, which would be, today, essentially a government of Confindustria. At the head of the municipality, they place a council of 6 priors. And these 6 priors are appointed by the guilds. The guilds are the organizations, indeed, essentially industrial associations. They have many, the furriers, the silk entrepreneurs, those of wool, the notaries, the doctors, and so on. The government is in the hands of these, and it is in this phase that a man like Dino finds himself in power, because as long as the nobles were in command, men like Dino were in the shops. When Florence, at the end of the 1200s, undertakes this experiment of expanded democracy, expanded as far as it can go, because Dino's workers are not in government, he, however, as an entrepreneur who takes off his hat in front of the noble Buondelmonti, finds himself among those who go to government. and often finds himself in a power structure. Keep in mind that the government of an Italian municipal city is made up of countless commissions, sub-commissions, councils, and boards, consisting of 6 men, 12, 18, 4, that last very little. They are changed continuously. At most they serve for a year, but often they serve for much less. The 6 priors represent the true government of the city, making the decisive decisions, so to speak. The 6 priors change every 2 months. It's as if the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers changed every 2 months, because to them it seems the only way to prevent certain people from gaining too much power and starting to pursue their own interests too much. Thus, these commissions rotate. A lot of citizens are called to participate in the government, and the nobles are not very happy about it. The great drama of Florence, as seen by Dino Compagni, is that we have created this government of the people, and we would govern the city well in the collective interest. But instead, there are the nobles with their friends, their parties, their factions, who only think of their own interests. No one thinks of the collective interest, the public interest, and conflicts of interest are frequent. There is a conflict with Arezzo, precisely. Dino and many other good commoners would be of the idea, well, but why do we have to go to war against Arezzo? Let's come to an agreement, let's discuss, let's not do it. The nobles want to go to war because it benefits them. They know how to wage war, and if war is fought, it means golden salaries for the nobles and loot, and it means they will have power. And if the war is won, who won it? We, the nobles. And so the merchants should stay in their place, so it benefits the nobles. In the end, the war is fought even though Dino was in government at that moment and had voted against it. However, the war happened, and Dino, here the merchant actually comes out, says it is war. More is consumed in one day of war than is earned in many years of peace, and he knows it well. It is one of the few times he talks about profit in his book. Profit is his daily life, but here he talks about politics. But even in politics, profit is involved. And when you have to decide on war, the merchant remembers that war costs a lot of public money. So much would be saved by making peace. But the nobles want war, and war is waged. Moreover, the nobles want war because in war, only they matter. Another thing that is obvious in Dino's mind and those like him is that they do not like war. Also because they do not know how to fight it, do not want to fight it, and are not interested. In times of peace, the merchant can have more money than the noble and be better at managing. But in times of war, the merchant stays at home, and the noble is the one in command, and merchants do not interfere in war. Thus, war is waged, and the nobles become increasingly overbearing. And the characteristic of overbearingness is that they do not obey the laws. This is another thing that disgusts Dino. We have good laws in Florence. If only they were respected, the city would prosper, but the laws are not respected. Why? A bit, I must say, because there is something for everyone, due to the judges. The damn judges, says Dino, who interpret the law and favor their friends and support their party. Well, but still, if that were the only issue, the problem is that the nobles do not obey the law. The nobles go around armed, try to arrest them. And so the solution is an even harsher government of the people that keeps the nobles, so to speak, in their place, that puts them back in their place, that forces them to obey. They tried it once. I always cite Arezzo, because Dino often cites Arezzo, which at that time was an important Tuscan city. In Arezzo, Dino says, the nobles were unbearable due to their arrogance. They established a government of the people. They called someone from outside who commanded in Arezzo and put the nobles in their place, says Dino, forcing them to obey the laws, which is already an unheard of thing. Then in Florence it ended. In Arezzo it ended very badly. The nobles could not take it anymore. They armed themselves, took power by force, and broke, as Dino says, the government of the people. They locked the leader of the people in a cistern and left him to die of hunger inside the cistern. And in Arezzo, the government of the people ended. But in Florence, where the common people are tougher, they want to try, and they establish the ordinances of justice. We have also heard these mentioned in school. Giovanni della Bellini. What are the ordinances of justice? In 2 words, an extraordinary law. The law states that nobles cannot hold any government position in all the 1,000 commissions, subcommissions, councils that govern Florence. If someone is noble, they cannot be part of it. Secondly, if a noble offends a commoner, if he draws his sword, he must be punished. Not only him, but all his relatives. They are all held accountable for one another. And there must be an armed body. We find the money in the budget. We set up a police force at the service of the people, that when there is a complaint against a noble for violence, they go there, arrest everyone, tear them down, raze their houses to the ground, because that's how it was done, and thus the nobles will stay in their place. And this system is established. From that moment on, the 6 priors of Florence are forced to stay barricaded inside the Badia Palace. The town hall does not yet exist. And in the budget of Florence, there is a payment for a special guard of policemen to protect them, because the life of one of the priors is worth nothing at this moment. If they go out into the street and encounter a noble, there you go. And yet, in this situation of extreme tension, they still manage to pass these laws, excluding the nobles from office. At a certain point, Dino says, yes, but who are the nobles exactly? Because it's easy to say, but is there a list? Let's make one. They make the list. Every family that has had a knight among its members is to be considered a noble family, a family of magnates. If you have had a knight, you are not one of us, because we are that peaceful people who want to work and make money and who do not go around armed. So those who have knights are the others. We do not want them. They cannot govern Florence. The nobles are obviously not very happy. You can understand that too. The nobles are beside themselves with rage, especially since they waged war against Arezzo, won the Battle of Campaldino, and as a reward, they were thrown out of the government. Dino knows. He knows what the nobles talk about when they are among themselves. These commoner dogs who have driven us out of the offices and honors of our city. We are the ones who dealt the defeat at Campaldino, and now they have driven us out of the offices. The nobles are ready to do anything to return to power. And it is here, in this situation, that Dino begins to become an important political figure. You understand that it is not an easy situation to manage. Dino is a man of the merchants and a man of the corporations, often mentioned among the priors. How does this politics that Dino is called to manage work concretely? What does it mean? How does it work? How does it happen? It is all assembly-based, it is all collective, because citizens feel they are all part of politics. Decisions are made, as I was telling you, in countless councils where anyone can be nominated. Certain councils are even drawn by lot. The names of all citizens are put into a large bag and drawn, so anyone can come to power. It is a very advanced experiment in democracy. We are at the end of the 200s. And then many things are discussed. A veteran of 68 or 77 would have felt right at home in Florence at the end of the 200s. Because at every opportunity what is done, an assembly is called, and in the assembly everyone speaks, and then those who speak the loudest are the ones who win, and everything is decided this way. Even things that seem absurd to us to decide in that way. When they wage the famous war against Arezzo, which I was telling you about, they must make a fundamental strategic decision. If we are the strongest, we attack. But which way do we go to get to Arezzo? Do we go through Valdarno or through Casentino? It is an important strategic decision that depends on many other things. Today there would be a commanding general who decides, but instead they gather a large assembly in the Baptistery of San Giovanni, which is the classic place where people meet in Florence because the Palazzo Vecchio does not yet exist at that time. And so, in the Duomo of San Giovanni, all the most important citizens, all those who have positions and hold offices, all the experienced old knights, all the military commanders, are all there, and they all discussing all day in public to decide whether to attack Arezzo by going through Casentino or through Valdarno, and then to decide after everyone has spoken and given their opinion, what do? They vote. They vote with white and black beans, as is done in all councils. Each person has their white bean and their black bean. Then they deposit them in the urn and it is counted. And Dino says, we won by going through Casentino. and it was the worst road. But, anyway, fortunately, God protected us, and it went well anyway. So it is an assembly democracy, where things are done with very broad participation. And it is a life, how should I put it? Also here, I already said it yesterday, it is a simple world, where there are limits to what can be done that we can't even imagine today. I will give you another example. Dino tells this. There was a moment of serious crisis in Florence when Carlo di Valois, a French prince, arrived in Florence to make peace between the various opposing parties sent by the Pope. We had to listen to him because he was sent by the Pope and the King of France, but there was little trust. There was fear that he wanted to favor one party against the other, as indeed happened later, it was seen, says Dino. So it was a moment we had to make decisions quickly. What do we do in front of this gentleman who comes and will give us orders? We had to decide quickly what to do. To quickly decide what to do, what is done? An assembly is called. Since it is an assembly and everyone can speak, there is a platform with a railing and the speakers take turns going up on this platform and speaking. And Dino says we had to decide quickly and people went up there and spoke. Bandino Falconieri had nothing to say, but he came there and awkwardly held onto the railing for half a day. And it was, says Dino, the lowest times of the year. That is, it was November. Do you understand what that means? The days are short. When it gets dark, everyone goes home. You don't continue to stay outside to discuss. Politics ends. When it gets dark in November, it closes at 5 in the afternoon. Either you have decided or you are done. You don't stay outside when it's dark. These are limitations that we can't even imagine. And instead, they have these problems in the concreteness of their lives. And therefore, in this politics in which Dino finds himself immersed, money counts a lot. It is a politics. It is a world where money circulates a lot and counts a lot. Without money, nothing can be done. You can't wage war and you can't do politics either. When the municipality needs money, wealthy citizens, big financiers advance money to the municipality, and they should also be thanked. Then it is clear that when you have advanced money to the municipality, you are waiting for the repayment. But while waiting for the repayment, there are many ways to get compensated. So wealthy citizens, big bankers willingly lend money to the government. Money counts. It counts in politics. Everything is done with money. It is rare to find someone like Cardinal Matteo d'Acquasparta who is sent to Florence at a certain point by the Pope, as usual, because you must know that Florence is a great ally of the Pope. And the Pope is slightly disheartened to see that in Florence they do nothing but slaughter each other among factions, that the city is continuously divided by civil wars and clashes. The Pope would like to bring peace. And they are very afraid that someone from the Pope will arrive with orders, because they are annoyed by the cardinals coming to give them orders. But at a certain point, Cardinal Matteo d'Acquasparta arrives and tries to bring peace. And this bothers many people. And finally, one is found, says Dino, someone of little sense, who shoots an arrow with a crossbow at the window of his house. The arrow gets stuck in the window frame, nothing happens, but the cardinal is quite upset. He is about to leave, placing an interdict on Florence, so he needs to be calmed down. He needs to be pacified. What do we do to pacify the cardinal? Well, we send him some money. The government decides to check the law, how much money can be allocated without having to hold a public vote. Because if a public vote is needed, we won't get out of it. In a secret vote, up to 2,000 florins can be sent. So it's fine. We send 2,000 florins to Cardinal d'Acquasparta. And Dino and the others bring them to him. In fact, Dino himself says he will bring them in a silver cup. He brings the 2,000 new florins. He says, freshly minted. And he says to the cardinal, "Sir, look, it's few. I know 2,000 florins is a colossal amount, but still it's few. But more cannot be spent without holding a public vote, so please be patient." And the cardinal replied that he valued them and looked at them closely but did not want them. But there are very few of these indeed who do not take the money. Normally, everyone takes the money, and politics in the city is done for this reason. The picture that Dino paints of the politics in which he found himself operating is shocking, where no one cares about the public interest, where everyone is in politics to serve their own interests and those of their relatives and their party in that order, and those are the only things that matter. He says there is constantly a competition for positions. The positions are the seats, you understand. They are the countless seats that allow you to make important decisions for maybe just 2 months. For these seats, people fight and do everything. Then once you have obtained the seat and know that you only have it for 2 months, you must also hurry to make it profitable. At that point, everything happens. Everything is bought and sold, contracts are bought and sold, processes are bought and sold. Then Dino says, it is clear that in this way, decisions are never made. I must say this sends a shiver through our Italy today when reading this. Dino says, everything decided one day is undone. The next. And I quote him again, evil is not punished by law. Just as the wrongdoer has friends and can spend money, so he is freed from the wrongdoing done. In this situation, the stakes are high. Being in government means not having problems with justice. It means that your trials are buried. And it means that you are the one putting your hands in the pockets of citizens, to use a more contemporary language. Because the government taxes. But I don't want to elicit applause that is too easy. I am talking about Florence at the end of the 200. In Florence, at the end of the 200, what are the major problems? It is the distribution of taxes, public money. There is the treasure of the municipality, and those in power swear to safeguard the municipality's treasure. Instead, Dino says, they found ways to steal it as best they could. And they took money from the treasury, he says, under the pretext of rewarding people who had served the municipality. Up to 2,000 florins, it is understood. There is no need to vote. It is given, and the money goes out. There are scandalous cases. There is one case in particular that Dino notes because people really could not take it anymore. A very prominent party leader has died, Messer Rosso della Tosa, one of the richest and most influential men in Florence. The municipality has decided to reward his family for the great services rendered by this party leader. He armed knights at the expense of the municipality for the sons of Messer Rosso della Tosa. Now you must know that arming a knight is a very expensive thing, because it requires great celebrations, public banquets, gifts, and the purchase of horses and armor. It is a huge expense, and also because knights are prestigious, as they are few. It takes a lot of money to be a knight. The municipality decides that with public funds, knights are armed and the 2 sons of this very wealthy party leader are covered with gifts. And the people murmur, but they can't do anything about it. They settle for making fun of them. People say that someone calculated that all the money spent to arm knights for these 2 rich kids was roughly equivalent to the taxes paid by the poor workers who work in the spinning mills. And they are starving and taking bread out of their mouths to pay taxes to the workers of the spinning mill. Therefore, they say, they were called the knights of the spinning mill. And that's fine, but how to say, it's a poor consolation after all, because those in government with public money do what they want. And every now and then someone arrives and says, but it's not possible, where does the money go? We need to do the math. But Dino knows very well that when someone comes to say these things, it's because his faction is not in power at that moment and wants to bring down the others. And so the faction that is not in power is always ready to call the citizens to the square and say, but where has the money gone? It is not possible that so much has been spent for the war against Arezzo. Who has pocketed it? However, Dino believes little that this political class made up of great nobles is truly capable of moralizing public life. He finds himself in power multiple times, and his ideal is to try to pacify the parties to do as he says. Let's be clear, he says that his to serve the common interest, not to allow any party to prevail, to put an end to the embezzlement. He is in power but is crushed by these opposing forces. Note that, as I was telling you, the government of the 6 priors lasts 2 months. After 2 months, it is known that they leave and 6 others are appointed. Well, at certain moments, the opposition takes to the streets and threatens cataclysms, because they want the priors' resignations. It is not enough that they will have to resign anyway in 2 months. Requesting the resignation of the current government is something that is done at certain moments with extreme insistence and petulance, saying that this government is not neutral, we want a truly neutral government. At a certain point, Dino finds himself forced to yield. He would be among the priors and in government. He would still have a few weeks in office. But the pressures from the large factions of the parties wanting them to resign are so strong. They say, fine, it would be illegal, but we resign. We call a meeting of all party leaders and appoint a new government. They convene this meeting, and Dino is very proud, saying, well, there are two main opposing parties, the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs, who are fighting in the square. Let's create this new government. Let's make it equal, says Dino. Because it is essential. I don't want to do anything shady. Let's make a truly equal government. The priors are 3 whites and 3 blacks. Then there would be a 7th government position, the Gonfalonier of Justice, who commands the police, and when, according to the justice ordinances, a noble commits a crime, must have him arrested, go to have his houses razed, and so on. Here, the 7th is the Gonfalonier of Justice, says Dino. It could not be divided. So how do they do it if it cannot be divided? They want to create an absolutely equal government where all parties are satisfied. How do they handle the 7th? Dino says, well, we chose someone who was worth so little that he couldn't scare anyone. As you can see, the Cencelli manual was not invented by anyone. They have exactly the same concern for distribution. Well, Dino says, while we were discussing, we were forming the new government with 3 on one side and 3 on the other, balanced. One of the party leaders from the blacks arrived. He names names, took me aside and said, but listen, Dino, couldn't it be arranged that you give us more positions and less to those others? And Dino, in the face of this, he is indignant, because you understand that this politics, I am describing it as a politics, but then the part that finds itself in the minority risks that one day they will physically harm them, because that is, how to say, the outcome of rivalries. Dino has this idea that he is finally forming a balanced government, where there are the right and the left, the whites and the blacks, equal parts. And then someone comes to tell him, but listen, give us more positions instead. He says, I don't want to play the role of Judas. And I replied that before I committed such betrayal, I would feed my children to the dogs. After that, this time he holds firm and manages to resist. And this balanced government made in equal parts where the 2 opposing parties are equally represented. Try to guess if it lasts long or not. It lasts nothing. It immediately collapses and starts over. So Dino finds himself doing politics at a time when the politics of Florence is in the hands of angry party leaders, willing to use violence and who, according to him, have no idea what the public interest is. They only want to seize power, and he represents himself. Who knows then? We have his voice. However, he, as a representative of these parties, does not belong. He is a modest man, a small entrepreneur, and he ended up in government because that is the system. His ideal is harmony. And he feels bad that the citizens do not understand this. That we would all be well if there were harmony in the city, if we were all truly patriotic citizens of our wonderful city. Florence would be so rich. And instead we are going to ruin because of this. When he gives speeches, he makes these speeches inspired by this idea. But why do you argue? Why do you want to confuse and dismantle such a good city? Who do you want to fight against? Against your brothers. He makes these pathetic speeches. Sometimes he moves them seemingly. There is a situation where the city is truly on the brink of civil war. He calls for the umpteenth time, you understand, an assembly in the baptistery. And in the baptistery, he gives this great speech where he says, but we are all brothers. You have all been baptized here, in this baptismal font, because at that time baptism only took place there in the cathedral, so every Florentine had passed through there, from that baptismal font of San Giovanni. And he gives this speech. It brings tears, this appeal, so to speak, to emotions. And then he says they were crying. I told them to swear to be all united, to no longer do harm to our city. They were crying, they all swore. Those who cried the most are the ones who, as soon as they left, started plotting to destroy everything. And another thing Dino says is, but it would have been reasonable to make peace because these factional struggles bring disaster to everyone. Reason tells us that we should get along, and it is again this appeal to reason that was fundamental for the people of that time. They always have reason on their lips. It is not an era, so to speak, dark from this point of view. The Middle Ages, For them, reason is an extraordinary ideal, because they believe that reason is given by God, but they have the ideal of a rational management of things in their minds. Then, on the other hand, men are not capable of being rational and reasonable. And so the city sinks into chaos, despite all the efforts of good people like Dino who would like to restore balance to city politics. The city sinks into chaos. And between the two great factions, we are also heading towards a conclusion, of course considering the time. Between the two great factions, the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs, one also begins to understand who will win. And who will win, unfortunately, Dino says, is understood, because at the head of the white Guelphs are the Cerci, a great family, who, however, are new people. They are merchants who have made money. They were people like me, like Dino. They made money. Now they are knights. They have weapons, horses, but in their hearts, in their souls, they are still merchants. And instead, on the other side, at the head of the blacks are the barons. There are the Donati, who are great ancient nobles, accustomed to making war. And seeing this, the people who understand how the world works, Dino says, have started at a certain point to say, hey, there is no match here. Here on one side we have the Cerci, and indeed they are merchants, and naturally they are timid and cowardly, and their enemies are masters of war and cruel men. If one party is led by merchants and the other party is led by noble knights, there is indeed no match, because the merchants will always seek compromise, pacification. They do not want to say, you know what, let's draw our swords and see who is more of a man. And instead, it is natural for nobles to think this way. Nobles, rather than accepting compromise and pacification, draw their swords. And Dino admits it. We ourselves, I and the other merchants who were in power at that time, he writes years later when it has ended very badly, we who were in power at that time were weak, we were vile, we did not understand that it was no longer the time to mediate. We tried to mediate. We tried to convene assemblies, to call meetings, to bring everyone together, to pacify them. And we missed the right moment because we shouldn't have done that. It wasn't the time. We shouldn't have negotiated for peace. Dino says to sharpen the tools, that is, to sharpen the swords, and we who were merchants did not understand that. Here in this politics of medieval Florence, you may have noticed that so far one thing has been completely lacking. I have never even remotely spoken about the religious dimension. We are used to thinking of medieval men, and we are right, as a deeply religious society, where the Christian faith matters and matters a lot. It is true, it matters a lot for the inner life of each individual. But in this politics of the Italian communes, religion does not matter at all. It is such a fierce, such a ruthless politics, where the only stake is power, that religion does not count at all. Those who feel religion within themselves see the contradiction. Dino, at a certain point, made them swear. He made all the most important citizens, all the party leaders in San Giovanni, swear that they would make peace. Years later, Dino says, I continue to think about this thing I did, and I am afraid and regret having done it because they all damned themselves. They all swore, and there isn't one who has kept this oath, but it is I who made them swear. I should not have done it. The religious dimension is the ultimate resource for those in politics who feel they are losing and can no longer cope. So he resorts to that. Dino at a certain point says we have also done this. Always the government, always the parties armed against one another, the city on the brink of sinking into civil war. Dino says a friar has arrived, a holy friar, a well-known religious man. He told us, why don't you hold a procession? A great procession in the city to invoke God's protection and so that all the citizens in the procession can find their unity. And Dino says, yes, we did it. We held the procession. He believed in that moment, but in reality, almost no one in the city believes anymore. Dino says, we held the procession and many mocked us, saying that it was better to sharpen the tools. Indeed, it was better to sharpen the swords and not hold the procession. The religion of politics is already out. There's nothing to be done. In that politics, there is only the power to be seized at all costs in every way, and religion remains as it is. It remains as the consolation for those who have ultimately lost. Dino loses because at a certain point, the violent party leaders take power and it's over for the small merchants called to govern, who return to their businesses, their companies. Dino remains in Florence for many years. He is not involved in the parties. They leave him alone. Meanwhile, those of the White Party who lose are exiled en masse from Florence. It is the moment when Dante Alighieri is also exiled from Florence because he was with the party that lost. Dino, no, he is someone who doesn't matter. He was in government when the merchants believed they commanded gold. But now it's over. The noble knights are in charge again, mind you. In agreement with the wealthiest merchants, because the wealthiest merchants and big financiers quickly understood that it was actually beneficial for them to align with the nobles and marry their daughters, and participate in their tournaments, and build beautiful palaces, towers, and buy horses and weapons, and be with the nobles, and the small entrepreneurs, the shopkeepers and artisans. Yes, they can stay in the city, but enough with politics, with important politics. Those days are over. Dino is done. He will live many more years managing his import-export company, and waiting to see if God punishes all these evildoers, who have brought the city to ruin, in his opinion. He waits because God's justice is slow. He waits. At a certain point, it seems to him that things are getting better, because Emperor Henry VII descends into Italy, and Emperor Henry VII descends into Italy, and it seems that the Castigamati has arrived, who will restore order, who will bring peace, and Dino is enthusiastic, he believes it. You understand what kind of renunciation this is. The city cannot govern itself alone. It does not exist. Someone bigger and stronger than us must come from outside to command us, and then perhaps we will know how to live in peace and be well governed. The Emperor is coming, says Dino, and he is on his way. He is descending into Italy bringing peace as if he were an angel of God. Because in every city he touches, he pacifies the factions, brings back the exiles. This is the great hope. When Dino writes, he is still waiting for the Emperor to arrive. Naturally, nothing will happen this time either. The Emperor will do nothing. Dino does not know this yet. And then Dino watches what happens to the great party leaders, to those who were at the helm of the factions when they destroyed the people's government and brought back, so to speak, the most brutal, violent assertion of power in the city. And the great party leaders, Dino is lucky. They live long. Sooner or later they die. And seeing them die one after another, Dino says to himself, well, after all, there is some justice in this world. Here, we, in politics, have lost. They have thrown us out of power. They have taken everything for themselves. But God is there and sees. And one after another, he goes to take them. And there is the one who stumbled while walking down the street and broke his knee. And the surgeons tortured him for a month. And then he got gangrene and died. And one after another, they die. And Dino watches and says to himself, yes, after all, God's justice exists. And it comes. Those were men of the Middle Ages, and they had this hope in front of the politics of their time. But we are not here to draw parallels with today. I was here to tell you how a Florentine merchant saw the world. Thank you.